please convene the Committee on Governmental Relations?
Thank you, Chair Kimball. Will the Committee on Governmental Relations please come to order? Before we begin the business of the Committee on Governmental Relations, is there any objection to the approval of the minutes? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. Before we get started on our report, I do want to compliment Larry Salinas and Nicole Munoz Murillo. We've started a very cooperative operation between the trustees and the administration in working to make sure that the trustees have full input into CSU positions on pending legislation. So you'll be getting a letter, if you haven't gotten it already, that comes from Crystal, the vice chair, and myself and Larry, explaining what our plan is, which is basically to let you know a couple weeks before each board meeting, a rundown of the major bills that we're focusing in on, so that if you have a special interest and you want to have that input as a trustee, you can have that input and plenty of time prior to each board meeting. And that didn't come about, all that without a complete cooperation and understanding that I think we all really appreciate. And you'll also be getting in the letter, it has an explanation of all the glossary of terms and everything that is there. So I wanted to thank everybody that's involved in that, and look forward to having that. So the committee has one information item on today's discussion agenda. By the way, I may have to jump out of here about 10 to 4, in which case I'd ask Crystal to complete this. But anyhow, the committee has one information item on today's discussion agenda, a state legislative update. The item will be presented by Larry Salinas, Vice Chancellor, University Relations and Advancement, and Nicole Munoz Murillo, Assistant Vice Chancellor, Advocacy and State Relations. Please begin.
Thank you, Trustee Fagan. I look forward to working with you and Trustee Reynes in this new role as Chair and Vice Chair of the Government Relations Committee. Before I introduce this item, I want to congratulate Trustees Arambula, Clark, and Ortiz-Morfitt on being confirmed by the State Senate. Your appearance before the Senate Rules Committee was very positive, and the votes to confirm you were an outgrowth of the strong bipartisan support that each of you had. We enjoyed working with you throughout the process, and we're very pleased with the outcome. Turning to the day-to-day business of the Advocacy and State Relations team, as you can see from your agenda, the team has been adeptly navigating the legislative process, which is evident in the number of problematic bills no longer advancing this year. The team successfully led our system-wide advocacy efforts to secure what Chancellor Castro noted is truly a historic budget. Assistant Vice Chancellor Munoz Murillo will now provide an update on key legislative issues and summarize our final budget advocacy efforts in Sacramento. Nicole?
Thank you, Vice Chancellor Salinas. We have now passed the midpoint of the legislative year. In order to continue to advance, bills had to have passed from the first House to the second by June 4th. One unexpected development that happened was that legislative leaders decided to limit each member to only 12 bills advancing to the second House. In a normal year, members will typically advance 15 to 25 bills, so this restriction led to dramatic narrowing of active legislation. The agenda item is organized with this development in mind. Active Senate bills begin on page 2, active Assembly bills on page 4, and on page 8, bills that did not advance to the second House and will not be acted upon for the remainder of the calendar year. I'll begin by highlighting a few bills that are no longer moving. The first bill that I will mention is our sponsored legislation, AB 940 by Assemblymember Kevin McCarty, which was held in the Assembly Appropriations Committee. However, that was not the end of the story or our effort. As you know, the goal of our legislation was to augment our student mental health services by using Prop 63 dollars. In other words, we were looking for opportunities to utilize specified mental health funds that occur in other areas of the state budget. As I let you know during our last meeting, the governor had proposed funding in the May revision for an expansion of youth and behavioral health services for individuals ages 25 and younger. Due to the broad coalition of support for our sponsor legislation and the strong case that was made with the legislature, we were immediately able to pivot. Specifically, we work with our bill's author, legislative staff, and administration officials to help secure a carve-out of funds for public higher education. In the Health and Human Services Agency budget, the final budget agreement included $150 million in one-time funds for grants that can be utilized by CSU, UC, and community college campuses to expand student mental health services. We were very pleased with this overall result of our efforts. I want to thank Assemblymember Kevin McCarty for authoring the bill on our behalf and being a strong advocate for this funding. I also want to thank the large coalition of vocal and effective supporters of the bill, including our faculty and CSSA. Our student leaders in particular went above and beyond in their advocacy of AB 940. Moving to another piece of legislation, I'd like to note that SB 566 by Senator Connie Leyva, found on page 9 of today's agenda, was also held and is no longer moving. This bill would have required the CSU to utilize existing funds to provide a 5% annual merit step increase for every support staff employee that receives a satisfactory performance review. We opposed this bill because it undermined the collective bargaining process and restricted the ability of the board to manage the system's finances in the best interest of our campuses and students. Now I'd like to highlight several bills that are still active in the legislative process. Of the active measures pending in the legislature, there is only one in which we have taken a opposed position. That bill is AB 815 by Assemblymember Luz Rivas, which is found on page 5 of your agenda. The bill authorizes the Commission on Teacher Credentialing to approve a school district nurse credentialing program offered by local school districts. While we understand the critical need for skilled and highly trained school nurses, we contend that a duplicative school nurse credential pathway that lacks accreditation is unnecessary. We currently have 3 programs in the CSU, and they have capacity to serve more students. Additionally, these programs are offered in a distance learning format so that location is not a barrier to individuals who desire to become school nurses. Our team is working to make our case with the legislature. During our last meeting, I highlighted AB 928 by Assemblymember Mark Berman, which is aimed at improving the transfer process and is found on page 6 of your agenda. The bill is being heard tomorrow in the Senate Education Committee, and there continues to be many perspectives being shared with the author, including from the CSU. Last week, Chancellor Castro sent a letter to the author providing recommendations to appropriately recognize the vital faculty role in curricular matters, as well as to ensure that the proposed singular general education pathway prepares students for transfer and STEM pathway opportunities, while not becoming burdensome to degree completion. We have a pending position on the bill, and we will continue to work with the author and stakeholders as the bill moves forward. There are also a number of bills that are continuing through the process, but their content and ultimate outcome may be impacted by the final budget agreement. AB 1456 by Assembly members Jose Medina and Kevin McCarty, dealing with Cal Grant reform, is one such example. The final budget agreement included substantial ongoing investments in financial aid, some of which were consistent with aspects of the bill, including reducing eligibility barriers for community college students. Additionally, the final budget agreement included a more than $500 million expansion of the middle class scholarship program. These dollars are aimed at providing additional funding for lower and middle income CSU and UC students to cover non-tuition costs. While this aspect of the agreement won't be implemented until 2022, it is clear that our students will greatly benefit from this expansion, and we are tremendously grateful for this investment in our students. The bill is also being heard tomorrow in the Senate Education Committee. We anticipate that it will be modified in light of the final financial aid expansions agreed to in the final budget agreement. We will continue to work with the authors and stakeholders as the bill moves forward. Before I talk about budget advocacy, I can't move on from the topic of financial aid without recognizing our students. The work and the voices of our students who have passionately advocated for financial aid reform for many years have been a powerful voice in the financial aid conversation. Their consistent presence in the Capitol and fixed financial aid campaign played a vital role in the historic investments that were made in financial aid this year. Their efforts should be commended, as hundreds of thousands of future CSU students will benefit from their efforts. Speaking of advocacy, let me move on to our final budget efforts. As you can see from the faces in this photo, we were thrilled with the success of this year's Big Splash event. For those of you who are new to the board, for numerous years, the CSU has organized a social media day towards the end of budget negotiations when we asked members of the legislature to wear CSU branded items. Frankly, we did not know how this year would go. Because of COVID-19 precautions, our team could not get access to the Capitol building, and we had to completely rely on members and legislative staff to distribute and promote the wearing of our items. Two of our alumni, Senator Steve Glazer and Assemblymember Mark Levine, and their teams were our champions as true Capitol insiders who led the day's success. We are grateful for all the work they did in passing out our items and elevating our Big Splash Day. We also want to thank our leaders, including many of you, and our campus presidents who tweeted photos of themselves, congratulating the class of 4 million, as well as reminding our state's leaders why investing in the CSU is so important to California. In the end, within a 24-hour period, we had 5.5 million Twitter timeline deliveries for hashtag CSU for CA, with a reach of 1.1 million. This means that our hashtag appeared in Twitter timelines more than 5.5 million times and to more than 1 million individuals. While we are proud of those numbers, our audience is Sacramento, and we were thrilled with the large number of members who posted photos of themselves on the floor. It was a very fun day, and it was great to see so much pride in the CSU and our alumni. While we were all overjoyed with the final budget, it was a true team effort that helped us achieve an almost unimaginable budget outcome. From our budget advocacy day in February, led by our chancellor and campus presidents, which laid the foundation of our budget request, to the consistent advocacy efforts of our campuses over months, to highlighting our resource needs and impact we have on the economy, there were many, many people who had a hand in this tremendous outcome. That said, there was a group of us who met every other week since last fall. During our meetings, we would receive budget updates from Assistant Vice Chancellor of System-Wide Budget, Ryan Storm, and we would share information about our advocacy efforts and what our respective organizations were each doing to elevate the CSU budget request. Given their dedication and advocacy, I want to take a moment to acknowledge each member of this group. From CSSA, Mary Washington and Hannah Braxtat. From the Academic Senate, Dr. Rob Collins. From the Alumni Council, John Poley, Aaron Moore, Jody Braverman, and David Gamboa. From CFA, Brian Haw, Ron Rapp, and Dr. Stephen Filling. From CSUEU, Vicki McLeod and Jim Filiu. And last but certainly not least, from my team, Eric Bakke and Shafali Mistry. I also want to thank Shafali for all the behind the scenes work she did in making sure that the Big Splash event was a success. I also want to thank Chancellor Castro for leading our advocacy efforts and for having a constant Zoom presence in Sacramento. Last week was particularly inspiring as he met face-to-face with more than a dozen state leaders and had brief conversations with several others. In each interaction, he was able to thank them for this historic investment. Again, we appreciate all of the collaborative advocacy and the organizations that partnered with us throughout this process. Trustee Fagan, this concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Doug, you're on mute, Doug.
All right, so I'm not the only one, but I finally done that. Sorry about that. All I was saying was the congratulations are certainly in order, not to be redundant for everything that has already been said throughout the meeting about the budget success, but certainly the governmental relations operation and Nicole and Larry and the whole team up there on the lobbying side. What a success. And that's not an easy thing to do. And so, wow. So that said, any questions or comments? Let's see. Jack?
I just want to say, echo that what you just said, Doug. A great job by Larry and Nicole, and Obviously, you've done a phenomenal job getting the budget sold up there, and that's great. I only have one bill I have a problem with. It's the same old one. I'm going to be like a broken record. Somehow we don't want to learn from history. We want to run another $15 billion bond on a midterm election, which has got that doesn't have a snowball chance in hell of passing. And I think it's time for us to detach from this. I know Senator Glazer is a great supporter of CSU. He's a great senator up there, but I think we need to rethink this political strategy. We need to go back to UC and go back to the $8 billion bond measure for UC and CSU. We're not going to get any money. We keep up with the strategy. I mean, the voters spoke at the last election, and to run this thing back again, I don't get it. And I'd be glad if we detached from them and we formed an alliance with UC and did the $8 billion bond to be part of a campaign committee, that we go out and raise $5 million and get this damn thing passed. But this is not the way to do it. I mean, I don't know why we're not listening to the voters and the most well-participated, the highest level of participation in a general election in history in the state. And they told us no. So why, we're just banging our heads against the wall. So I just think it's time to separate. I'd be glad to be part of a group to talk to the regents. I've got a couple of friends over there. It's time to go separate and apart from them and raise our money and win a campaign.
Larry, Nicole, anybody want to chime in on that?
Sure, I can. Trustee McCrory, we're definitely hearing you. I want to just provide a little bit of an update, as this was the bill deadline is this week for policy committees to move out. Both this bill, SB 22, as well as the companion measure in the Assembly, which does not include higher education, were both made 2-year bills. So this is going to be a conversation again over the fall, and we will be engrossed in those conversations about what will bond measures look like. I also just want to say that, in our meetings last week that Chancellor Castro and our team had, we were raising this issue and talking about the importance of it. And I think we were very heartened to hear about the support there is for higher education in getting a bond measure. So we're very eager to have those conversations. They just have not happened yet, and they will be happening this fall.
My recommendation would be neutral, not support.
One of the things, Jack, your comments last time spurred us into thinking about making sure that the trustees are well aware in advance of what's going on with these bills and have plenty of time to enter opinions into the mix. So that's one of the reasons that Nicole and Larry have agreed to send this stuff out a couple of weeks in advance, so that when you get something and you haven't seen it before, that we're working on, or that the administration is working on, the idea is to feel free to contact Nicole, contact Larry, and really weigh in and make your views known. And that includes me and Crystal and anybody else on the Governmental Affairs Committee, because it's very important that this is a collaborative, collegial effort by the trustees with the administration. So we want to make sure everybody's aware of what's going on way in advance. Roman.
Well, since I enjoy the nickname Trustee Deferred Maintenance, I feel I need to comment on this as well. Of course, I would be very, very pleased if the CSU would get $2 billion from SB 22 for facilities and deferred maintenance. However, while acknowledging the strong and perpetual support by Senator Glazer for higher education, I agree strategically with Trustee McCrory here. I think a separate proposal, one that only focuses on higher education, would have a greater likelihood of success. First of all, the sticker shock would not be so big, like the $15.5 billion that would certainly scare the voters. And also, I feel it's more honest if we put it to the voters, because the higher education facilities are just simply different than K-12 facilities. So I agree strategically with Trustee McCrory, and I would like to support his request to move to neutral if it's even necessary that we still assume a position on this bill.
Okay. This brings up an interesting question about, how this sort of thing gets resolved. And I leave it to Larry and the Chancellor, and in this case, Romy and Jack, to have that communication with Larry and Nicole, and hopefully work out something that is acceptable. And if there are continuing problems, to figure out how we get a general feeling of what the trustees want.
I think that's one of my problems, Doug. I'd be glad to go up there and start talking to people, but I don't want to do something that's unique to me and not with the support of the trustees, because I don't think we've really felt this one out across the board with the rest of the trustees. And so I feel I'd be out on a limb, I think, if I were to do something on my own. I don't think that would be appropriate.
No, I think that you're right about that. And some specific things in our rules and operations about that very subject. But this is the situation that, we were trying to resolve or at least address with the letter you're going to get, various things. So maybe we should have a continuing conversation very soon about that, not only on this bill, but question of how do we do this. So Larry, should we have a next step where we put out a thing to the trustees and get their input?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Trustee Fagan. I would move that let the trustees receive the correspondence from you and Vice Chair Reynes and myself, take a look at that process. And then certainly I welcome Trustee McGrory's important input in this process and all of the trustees on this. I mean, this is a new step that we're trying to take to increase the engagement of the trustees. And each of you bring connections to the board and to the legislature that we certainly want to foster that effectiveness as we peel off, as Trustee McGrory pointed out, or we come up with a different strategy. But the main point is, let's start that dialogue now with that correspondence that you'll be receiving from Chair Fagan.
Okay, thank you very much. Anybody else have a comment? I got to put my glasses on to see.
Yeah, I do.
Oh, Chancellor Castro.
Yeah,
Right.
Thank you. I appreciate the conversation on this important matter. And I think it's important that we stay involved in the conversation going forward. And the Senate bill does that. It keeps us in the conversation. The Assembly bill, as I recall, Nicole, is a K-12 focus. So these are discussions that we'll have with our legislative leaders and the governor, and then we can figure out exactly how to proceed. I know Senator Glazer is open to our ideas, and if we want to make a change with the UC, I think he'd be open to that conversation. So I just wanted to give you that fuller context, is that we want to stay in this conversation, and the leaders of the legislature want us to stay in it.
Thank you, Chancellor. Anybody else comment? Well, thank you very much. I think that's the end of the Governmental Affairs Committee. Chancellor Kimball, it's back to you.
Thank you, Doug, and thank you to Larry and Nicole for that presentation.